Well, first of all, I think utilizing AI, I mean, considering what I said before, right? Utilizing AI is actually a very quick win that firms can adopt in terms of technology to actually quite significantly increase their efficiency. Because let's say if you learn how to use tools like Chai GPT, Gemini, Claude properly, you don't necessarily need to integrate already all of them into your process and like build complex agents or complex workflows that do API calls, whatever, right? You can just use the tool effectively. And even if you just do that, in select tasks, you can increase your efficiency by 30, 40%, but most importantly, actually increase the quality of the output, right? Make sure you don't miss any details that could be overlooked, for example, by a human, in let's say a personal injury case, right? Make sure that your argument is as solid as possible. Um, so by making sure that you're actually communicating well with those models, and ultimately it's not that hard. Like once you get the hang of it, you will get a feeling for like what information the model needs versus what information is extra and not really beneficial, right? And it's really striking that line. It's like, how do I manage the context that I'm given this AI model, right? So it can do its task effectively, but I'm also not overburdening it with too much information. Example, if I need to maybe draft a client email, I wouldn't want to put all of my medical records about that case, right, into the prompt and then ask it about it, right? Versus, obviously, if I'm trying to, let's say, prepare a medical chronology, obviously I would need to provide all those medical records, otherwise it wouldn't be able to do the job. So it's just really making sure that you provide enough information to the model for it to complete the task. Um, but don't overdo it. I mean, ultimately, that's a fine line.
Yeah. Okay. So let's break down the that example for a second. So let's say you want a medical chronology created out
Yeah.
of from your client's records. What is the best way of approaching that then? Because you said you don't want to dump them all into a prompt and everything. So how would you break it down?
I mean, if it's a very simple case, let's say it's, I don't know, 100 pages of medical records, you can potentially honestly do it in one single prompt. And you have quite, let's say, high confidence that the model will do a good job, right? If you're working with a more complex case, let's say 3,000 pages of medical records, then you need to understand the limitations of the models that you're working with, right? What we've seen, for example, with Gemini is that after, I would say like 300, 400 pages per prompt, right, per chat, its hallucination rate starts increasing, right? Not only in terms of, let's say, making up information, which is actually somewhat less of an issue, it's more so errors of omission, which a lot of times people don't think about. It's, I have supplied this, let's say, 1,000-page medical records to Gemini. How to actually make sure that he has included all the treatments, right? And that's the biggest issues with big records. Because ultimately the model is trying to do its best to summarize, right? But it has a limited as well output window, so it cannot summarize necessarily everything if it's a very long record. So what I would do there is I would just simply break the record up, right? If it's multiple files, it's obviously easier. If it's one single file, you can just really break it, for example, by dates, and then process those records individually in separate chats, right? Making sure that you don't pollute the same chat with multiple records. So in separate chats, get those individual summaries, and almost you have like this a bit, let's say, of a funnel, right? You start with a lot of those like medical records, very big amount of information. You then condense it to summaries of individual records, right? And then in a separate prompt, you then, for example, draft the demands or draft a chronology from that, where you just operating, let's say, maybe with 20 pages of data, but that's already summarized data, so the model again can do a good job, right? And that's where you distill it down to an actual piece of work that can be confident about and verifiable.